Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to do this beautiful sunset from Loda Marcos. And the sun that's shining here, this wave here is actually the water that's going up on the beach. And then, so you see the sun reflected down here, but not so much back there other than this orange. And this painting's really all about values. So today we're going to look at, what value should you be painting. We are going to wet the paper first, and that's going to decrease the value of our paint mix, probably about 1 or 2 values. So we will we'll have a look at that. I'm just going to get my value scale. And you can get one of these at any art store. The only thing is they have the values backwards from what Watercolour has them at. So, their 1 is a white. In this case, they had a 10 as a white, so it's kind of interesting. But if you look at this picture, the sky itself is probably around a 4 or 5. Not sure if you can see that. So we don't want to do it too light. The water itself is probably a 5 or a 6. So it's darker than that one, but maybe close to that. And there's some 8 in the water as well. And then our beach is somewhere around a 6, maybe a little bit of 8 here and there towards the front. So that's what we're going to work on. And we'll wet the paper first, and then we'll mix our paints. So when wetting the paper, I like to use a big brush like this. If you have one that doesn't lose too much hair, it's typically referred to as a hacky brush, but it's really good for wetting the paper, or a very large mop brush. But I like these because they let go of a lot of water, and you can make sure that you've got good coverage. So we're going to wet it thoroughly. And I'm kind of pressing the water into it as well to make sure it soaks that up quite a bit. And then just putting my head down to make sure that it's all shiny all the way through that. Okay. And then we're going to go mix our colors. I'm just going to clean off my palette a bit here. Spray down my paints as well. And if your yellows are dirty, clean them off before you do this, because we're going to be using the Hansa yellow or lemon yellow, which is going to be very bright. And we want to make sure that it's nice and clean. So I'm going to take my mixing brush. I'm going to mix up a bit of this bright yellow. And then I'm going to mix up some of this gamboge. I'm going to use Quin Rose today rather than Opera Pink. Or actually, that is Opera Pink. Now I'm using Quin Rose. Okay. And just water that down a bit because I put a lot of paint on there. And then if you have cerulean, use cerulean. If you don't, you can add a very weak mixture of ultramarine or even cobalt. And then the other color I'm going to use is lavender. And it just... it kind of dulls down the blues. Okay. And so that's our mixture. Now we're going to turn our paper over, and we're going to wet it on the other side. And the reason for wetting the paper is so that we have more time to work with the painting. Okay. And just make sure I've got it sitting right on my palette or on my board here. I think it's sticking up a little bit there, but we should be okay. Move it down a bit. There we go. And depending on the type of paper you have, this will prevent it from buckling. Some papers still buckle with this, but I'm not really sure which kind I'm using right now. I think it might be Saunders because it's not moving at all. And then the other thing you're going to do is just take a Kleenex, and where you're putting the sun, actually I have a pencil mark there that I'm probably not going to do the sun exactly like that, but I'm just drying that off a bit so that it's not so wet, and that way I can retain some of that brightness there. Okay, I should get rid of that pencil mark though, so maybe I'll do that now. I'm just going to take a scrubber brush and get rid of this because this is probably the lightest part of the painting, and I don't really want to see a pencil mark there. So this is a pretty light scrubber brush. I don't want to really destroy my paper. Okay, and then I'll dab it again just to take it off a little bit. So everything looks nice and shiny. Make sure it's even. I can see that I've got some spots here that aren't quite as even. Okay, I'll probably have to continue with that shape that I put there, but we'll see how it goes. And where I'm going to start is with the yellow around the sun, and then we're going to gradually go up and then come back down again. So I'm going to use probably this brush here. It's about a 14. Let's go to Perla. And I'm going to start just by putting that yellow in that is around the sun. I might try to put a tiny bit at the bottom here so my circle is a nicer shape. And then I'm going to mix that with my gamboge. Put some gamboge in. Maybe go up a bit higher with the gamboge because you can see from the picture that it actually does go quite high. And I'm going to do along that border there. And then I'm going to mix some of my Quin Rose with that as well. And apply that on. Now right now my paper is still fairly shiny, so I'm working with it on a really shiny basis. And I'm going to put a bit more orange closer to the sun here. Okay. And then I'm going to go with a bit more pink. Again, adding that to my orange. It's coming out quite red here, but it is red. And then I'm going to use pure pink, so the Quin Rose. Okay, and I could use a bigger brush here. It's not going on as smoothly as I would like. So I'm just going to take my Fumu mop brush and use that as well. And now I'm going to take some lavender and mix that in to the pink just along the top. And then I'm going to take my cerulean. And I'm going to place my cerulean up above first. Maybe strengthen it a bit, add a bit more paint there. And then have it join with that lavender. And a bit more lavender perhaps. And have a look at it and see whether you like what you've got. You can also tilt your paper so that you get some variety. I'm going to do a bit more out here. Okay, the only thing I don't like that much is along the bottom where the gamboge meets here. It's still pretty wet, so I'm okay with going in with that, but I'm going to dab off my brush a bit so that I don't have so much paint on it or so much water. And I'm just going to have more graduation on that ridge there. Okay, and don't worry about what's happening at the water line. In fact, you can go a bit further down with this color here. So the gamboge, and kind of extend that down. Not really so much yellow in there, but you could put a little bit in with the gamboge. Okay. And then I'm going to mix up a little bit more lavender. My paper's still wet. Now you could stop there as long as you've got no hard edges. But I'm going to just continue on because the paper is at the right consistency. And I'm going to add the lavender just at the sides here, like so. I see a bit more pink coming in from this side, so I'm going to add a little bit of that. Okay, and then there's also some orange coming out from here, so I'm going to put that in. And these we will cover this with a darker color, but these are just kind of offering highlights on the water there. And then I'm going to take a flat synthetic brush and I'm going to go down to where I think the sun would be reflecting, and I'm going to just wipe that out a bit. And this is where it hits the waves right here, so I'm going to wipe that out like so. I'm really pressing hard to get that wiped out as well. And then I can go in and add a little bit more orange to the sides of that to highlight that color. Okay, there seems to be a lot of orange down there. And in order for this to look whiter, we need some darker color beside it. Seems to get pinker out this way, so I'll just make sure I don't have too much water on my brush. Okay, and the pink will also help your blue from not turning too green. Oh, that's probably too bright there. Okay. And then the other color I'm going to add into this is more lavender. So I'm going to mix a bigger puddle of the lavender, and especially applying that in the distance. Gives a nice purple color. And again, this will help to prevent the color green coming out here. And this is all just an undercoat. Okay. And then again, down here, this is the last bit that's shining. And I'm just going to make sure I get this all the way down. And some more orange on the sides. Okay. right. Now there is a little bit of yellow in there, but we're not going to add that yet. Keep scraping it out. There's not as much of that shown here, but I think it's helpful to have that color. And then last but not least, take all the colors you have here on your palette and mix them all together. All those yellows, maybe need a bit more yellow, and you'll get a nice beach color out of this. Maybe a tiny bit more blue, but let's try it here. Yeah, that's a good color. And again, this is just the lighter part of the beach that might be showing through. Okay. All right. It's a bit higher up here. Okay. And that's it. That's your first coat done. Okay, just check your white, make sure this is coming down the way you want it to. I think that's looking pretty good. And you could actually spread it out a bit. Yeah. Okay. So there you go, first layer done. I'm looking at the lavender at the back and thinking this might need a tiny bit more, especially under this island here. Okay. There we go. All right. And maybe a tiny bit more pink. I add a tiny bit of pink over on this side. Oh, it's a bit dry there. Yeah, it's too dry. I shouldn't have did that, but that's okay. It's going to be covered anyway. All right, phase one done. I forgot one thing, and that was my clouds. I just want to mark them out. My sky's looking awfully light, but I'm just taking that flat synthetic brush again, making sure it's wiped off nicely. It was a bit wet, so it's kind of creating a bit of cauliflower there, but so these are some clouds in the sky. Just some random shapes. Okay. All right, and maybe some lines. Oop, that's too wet. Look at that, it's blossoming out. Okay. Rinse it, but then really squish it so that it's nice and dry there. Okay. And then we need some other lines. Towards the horizon, they're going to be flatter. They're also darker, but okay, I think we, oops, I had color on my thing, but that's okay. I'm gonna make this one bigger. I think that it should be connected. Let's go right off the page. Okay. Wherever I see these kind of darker lines, I'm trying to rub them out. Okay, that's probably all right. One here. Okay. All right. Okay, our first coat has completely dried. At this point, you can tape it down if you like. I'm just going to clip mine onto my board. I can get it on here. This one. Oh, a little bit crooked there. And probably this one. Oh, this doesn't. Oh, there we go. Okay, so that's not so bad. Now, what we want to do here is we want to get the highlights around the highlight of the sun on the water, and we want to make sure we don't make too much green here. So we've added a bit of purple and pink. That should help us out a little bit. But you'll notice there's quite a lot of orange in this area down here, and that orange kind of extends out through the waves. So I'm going to apply orange and pink in order for that to meld in. And we're going to wet it again, but we're just going to wet the areas that we're going to work on at first. So we're just going to wet the water. That's the area we'll be working on, and make sure it's nice and wet all the way across. And then we want it to be dry down where our reflection is. So I'm just dabbing that off a little bit and checking to see that it's fairly dry there. We may need to wet it as we go, especially when we go in with the orange. So I'm going to mix up an orange. That one is a bit too, that's this orange straight from my palette, and it's not as nice an orange. I'm going to try adding some Gambogian Hansa, and that should help out a bit. Maybe even water it down a bit, but first we'll give it a test here. It's still damp here. I just want to see if I put it on here whether the color is nice enough, and I think it is, actually. I don't think that's too bad. Now that had yellow behind it, so maybe it's going to be a little bit harder when we go to the other spots. And now what I want to make sure is I want to make sure I put plenty of orange down here, because that really highlights the reflection. And then I want to put some Hansa in there as well. You'll notice there's quite a bit of Hansa right on the edge of that. So this is all still wet, except for the middle part, which I'm trying to keep white. Okay, so that seemed to work out okay. I'm going to go back to my orange, and I'm just going to run it down like this. And over here, I'm going to get more pink. So I'm going to take a bigger brush. I'm going to put some pink there, maybe some purple. Actually, no, this brush might be too big. So just some orange to take through to there, and then maybe a bit of pink to go further away. So I'm just spreading out this lower part, and the pink will help it from not going green. So I'm actually using Quin Rose, not pink. And then I'm just going to keep extending that up. And now I'm going to go, you can go with lavender, or you can go in with Imperial Purple. Both will work, but make sure your paper is still nice and wet up here. Mine might need a little bit of spray just to keep it moist. Okay. And then you can straighten out those lines. So this is really just the base before we put in the blue. Okay. And then we're going to do the same over here. Make sure it's nice and wet. And then put in some purple. Put in a bit of pink. Don't need a lot of pink here. Just a little bit. And try to join that in with what we had there. You might have to rotate between paint on your brush and just water on your brush in order to get it nice and smooth. So I'm making sure my brush is wet, and if it's not wet enough, then I'm going to go in with water. Okay, so that's not so bad. And then there is orange in the middle, but I think I'm just going to let that kind of blend down a bit, just a tiny bit. Okay, and then we need a bit of purple coming into that. Okay, so that's the first layer of our water before we go in with the darker waves. Okay, and then down here we can just soften out the lines. Okay, if you got some hard lines where your reflection is, then you can just go and soften those a bit with a clean brush. Keep wiping it off. That should be good enough. And then we're going to do, while that upper part dries a bit, we're going to do a beach color. So I find the best mixture is take cerulean, mix it in with the orange, then add some pink, then add a bit more cerulean, add some pink, add a bit of yellow, and you end up with this kind of, I guess you can see that, you end up with this light brown color. And we're just going to apply that on dry paper. Okay. I probably need a bit more of a mixture, so let me just go through the combination again. Okay, cerulean. The cerulean will turn it green, so when you turn it green, you can add pink, and then that will turn it back to brown again, and if you need it a lighter brown, you add some yellow. Okay. All right. So I do want it to be smooth here. So I'm just going to apply a bit of water there, but I kept the water off the lower part because that's where I want it to be the darkest. Okay, and then here if you want to make footprints, etc., you can just kind of drag your brush through it, make some textures with it, and once you start hitting the water, it will go on a little bit smoother. Probably not enough paint on my brush here. Okay, let's try that again. Okay. Yeah, it's got to be a lot darker than that. So let's go through the combination again. All the colors we've used already. If it's too yellow, then you add, go back and forth between the pinks and the, okay, so that's nice. Seems to be working okay, but we should be darker than that. So I'm just keep going. And this part here, you want to start making the beach coming out in these patterns. You could add burnt sienna to it, but if you add burnt sienna, you'll have to add a little bit of cerulean as well. And then it'll turn green and you have to add pink. And that's gonna get you a darker sandy color there. So what I'm trying to do is there's these shapes that kind of go like this along the beach. So I'm just putting them in. It's quite dark up in this area. And then where the sun is hitting, you can add a tiny bit more yellow. Maybe not lemon yellow, maybe gamboge to the beach. And it's going to create a bit of a glow. Maybe a bit too much yellow there. Putting a little bit of pink in it. That should help it a bit. Okay. And I'm leaving this white space here because we can use that for shadows and so on. Adding a bit of burnt sienna. It's taking a long time to get this to the right color that I want, but I think we'll be okay. Okay, so that's our beach. And then you can go in with burnt sienna mixed with a bit of cerulean if you want that, those kind of rough spots where people stepped. Seems like there's a fair amount of that on that part of the beach. And that's it. Okay. So now we can pin that down and we can go back to the water. Maybe add a tiny bit more dark over here. Yep. Not so worried about this hard line at this stage. We can probably soften that out, but I might need it for the effect of the beach. Okay, let's put our things on. Okay, there's some footprints there as well. Okay, next, oops. Okay, plug in this. All right, so now our goal is to make this water blue. We have a bit of a problem with the line up here, but we'll fix that after we do the blue. And we should be okay. We're not going to go where the sun is. We're just going to add the blue out on this area here. And we should be, well, we're not actually quite dry, are we? Might have to wait till it dries a bit, because it looks like this is too damp. It's quite wet still. So we'll pause and come back when it's drier.